The thing I need you to understand first is that I was not a ranger. I was never a ranger. I worked for the General Services Administration out of a regional office in Portland, Oregon, and my job title was Federal Property Condition Assessor, which is a long way of saying I drove to buildings that the government owned and filled out forms about whether they were falling apart, roofing conditions, foundation cracks, mold, plumbing, electrical panels that hadn't been updated since 1974. I had a laminated checklist, a digital camera, a moisture meter, and a fleet vehicle that smelled like the last 3 people who'd driven it. I was not an adventurer. I was not trained in wilderness anything. I was a person who looked at buildings. Most of the work was urban or suburban. GSA manages thousands of properties, courthouses, post offices, federal office buildings, storage facilities. Occasionally, though, the system would generate an inspection order for something in the National Forest System, or the BLM, properties that had been transferred between agencies or were caught in some bureaucratic overlap, where nobody was sure who was responsible for maintenance anymore. These were the jobs nobody in the office wanted because they meant driving 4 or 5 hours into nowhere to look at a pump house or a storage shed that had been sitting empty since the Clinton administration. I took them because they paid mileage, and I needed the money. That year, this was 2017, I'd been separated from my wife for 8 months. She had the apartment. I had a room in a house in Gresham with 2 other men in their 40s, both of whom were also divorced. And the place had the specific energy of men who had stopped trying to impress anyone, including themselves. I ate a lot of microwave burritos. I drove a lot. I filled out a lot of forms. The work was not meaningful, but it was structured. And structure was the thing I needed most, because without it, I would sit in my room and look at my phone and wait for Sarah to text me something that was never coming. So when the Whitetail Creek cabin came up on the rotation in October, I took it without hesitation. It was a 5-hour drive from Portland, deep into the Ochoco National Forest in Central Oregon. The property was listed as a seasonal ranger duty station, a cabin that had been used by Forest Service personnel during fire season and then shuttered for winter. But there'd been some kind of administrative error or jurisdictional overlap. The property had ended up in the GSA system tagged as unoccupied federal structure condition unknown, inspection overdue 26 months. My supervisor flagged it as low priority, which meant nobody would check whether I actually went. But like I said, I needed the mileage. I left Portland on a Tuesday morning in early October. The drive east through the Cascades was the kind of beautiful that stops mattering when you do it often enough. I had a thermos of gas station coffee and a podcast about the history of concrete that I was listening to because it helped me sleep and I hadn't been sleeping. By noon, I was through Prineville and heading south on a series of increasingly narrow forest roads, following GPS coordinates because the actual address on the work order, Whitetail Creek RS, Forest Road 42, Ochoco NF, didn't correspond to anything Google Maps could find. The roads got worse. The pavement turned to gravel, and the gravel turned to packed dirt with a strip of grass growing up the center. I passed nobody. The forest here was ponderosa pine and Douglas fir, widely spaced, the understory dry and golden with October grass. It wasn't the dense, claustrophobic Pacific Northwest forest of the west side. It was open. You could see a long way between the trees. The sky was that flat, high-altitude blue that feels like it's pressing down on you rather than opening up. At around 1:30, I found the turnoff. There was a brown metal Forest Service gate across the road, the kind with a padlock and a sign that says, "Road closed with the dates left blank." But the padlock was hanging open, and the gate was pushed to one side. Recent tire tracks, not mine, led through. I noted this on my clipboard and drove in. The road climbed for another 1.5 miles through thickening timber before it leveled out on a small bench, a flat spot on the hillside, maybe 2 acres across. And there was the cabin. It was a standard Forest Service design from the 1960s. Green-painted wood siding, corrugated metal roof, a small covered porch facing south toward a meadow that dropped away into a creek drainage. 1 story, maybe 800 square feet. There was a propane tank on a concrete pad to the east side, a woodshed with a corrugated roof, and an outhouse about 30 yards uphill. A radio antenna, the old whip style, was bolted to the roof peak. No vehicles in the clearing, no sign of current habitation. The windows were dark. It looked like every other seasonal cabin I'd inspected, abandoned at the end of a use cycle and waiting for someone to either fix it up or tear it down. I parked, grabbed my clipboard and camera, and got out. The first thing I noticed was the quiet, not silence. There was wind in the ponderosa crowns and a Steller's jay somewhere behind the woodshed, making that electric shrieking sound they make. But under those sounds, there was a kind of vacuum, the particular acoustic quality of a place where no mechanical sound has operated in a long time. No generators, no vehicles, no distant highway noise. Just the biological sounds of the forest and the wind, and very faintly, water moving somewhere downhill. The second thing I noticed was the smell. Wood smoke. Faint but specific. Not the ambient char smell of a forest that's seen fire. I knew that smell from a dozen other inspections, but the active, sweet, slightly acrid scent of something burning right now. I looked at the cabin's chimney. No smoke. I looked at the woodshed. Nothing. I stood in the clearing and turned a full circle, scanning the tree line, the meadow, the drainage below. No smoke visible anywhere. But the smell was there, intermittent, catching on the breeze, and then vanishing. I wrote, "Smell of wood smoke noted on arrival, source not identified," on my form, and walked to the porch. The porch boards were solid. The railing had some rot on the south-facing side. I photographed it. The front door was a heavy 6-panel wood door, painted the same green as the siding, with a brass knob and a deadbolt. I tried the knob. Locked. I had a GSA master key set with me, but these Forest Service cabins usually used a different system. I checked the work order again. No key had been issued. The instruction just said, inspect exterior and interior if accessible. I walked the perimeter first, which was standard. Foundation was poured concrete, in decent shape, one hairline crack on the north side that I noted and photographed. The propane tank was a 500-gallon unit, and when I checked the gauge, it read, just above, a quarter full. That stopped me for a moment. A cabin that had been unoccupied for over 2 years shouldn't have had any propane left. These tanks bleed slowly through leaking valves and fittings. A quarter tank suggested either a very tight system or a recent fill. I photographed the gauge. The windows were single-pane, wood-framed, and most of them had interior curtains drawn. I could see through a gap in the curtains on the east side into what looked like a small kitchen. There was a table, 2 chairs, a counter with a dish rack. On the table, and I pressed my face close to the glass to make sure I was seeing this correctly, there was a plate. And on the plate, there was food. I'm not talking about old food, not the mummified remains of a meal someone left 2 years ago. I mean, food. A piece of meat, it looked like a pork chop, a scoop of something pale, maybe mashed potatoes, and a dark mass that could have been cooked greens. There was a fork on the plate and a glass next to it, half full of something amber, and there was steam. I could see the steam rising from the meat, very faintly, visible against the dark curtain behind the table. I stepped back from the window. I stood in the clearing and looked at the cabin again. Locked door, no vehicle, no sounds from inside, curtains drawn, no smoke from the chimney, but a warm plate of food on the table. I am not someone who frightens easily, but I am someone who recognizes when a situation has become incongruent, and this was incongruent. I had 2 immediate, rational explanations. Either someone was squatting in this cabin and had stepped out to the outhouse, on a walk, whatever, and would return shortly, or I was misperceiving what I was seeing through a dirty window and a gap in the curtains. I knocked on the front door. The sound was enormous in that quiet. I waited. Nothing. I knocked again, louder, and called out, "Hello? GSA property inspection. Anyone home?" The jay had stopped calling. The wind moved through the ponderosa and made that sound like slow water. Nobody answered. I walked to the outhouse. The door was closed but not latched. I opened it with my foot. Empty. Clean. There was a roll of toilet paper on the holder that looked new. Not dusty, not water-stained, not old. I photographed it for reasons I could not have articulated at the time, except that it seemed like evidence of something. I returned to the cabin and tried the windows. All locked. I walked back to the east side window, the kitchen window, and looked in again. The plate was still there. The steam was still rising. The glass was still half full. Everything was exactly as it had been 4 minutes earlier. But now I noticed something I'd missed before. Next to the plate, partially hidden by the glass, there was a napkin. And on the napkin was a ring of condensation from the glass. A wet ring. Fresh. I made a decision that I've thought about many times since. I decided to look for another way in, not because I'm brave and not because I was scared. Because I was a federal employee with a work order and a clipboard, and the clipboard said, "Bert, inspect interior if accessible." And I had driven 5 hours, and the only other option was to drive 5 hours back and write unable to access on the form. And I could not face another evening in that room in Gresham with nothing accomplished and nothing to show for the day except mileage. There was a back door, a simple wooden door on the north side, partially concealed behind the propane tank. It had a knob lock, but no deadbolt, and when I pushed on it firmly with my shoulder, I felt the frame give slightly. One more push, and the latch cleared the strike plate. The door swung inward. I was in a utility room, concrete floor, water heater, a washing machine that looked like it hadn't been used in years, shelves with cleaning supplies, most of them old enough to have labels I didn't recognize, a broom, a mop, and a bucket, and it was warm. Not warm like a building that's been sitting in the sun. It was October and overcast, and the building was shaded by ponderosa on 3 sides, warm like something had been heating it. The propane furnace, presumably running on that quarter tank. I could smell food. The wood smoke smell was present too, but underneath it, over it, around it, was the smell of a cooked meal, pork and something starchy, and the green bitterness of cooked greens. "Hello?" I said again. My voice sounded wrong in the space, absorbed. I walked through the utility room into a short hallway. The cabin was laid out simply. The hallway connected the utility room to the main living area, with a bathroom on the left and a closed door on the right that I assumed was a bedroom. The living area ahead of me was open kitchen on the right, a sitting area with a wood stove on the left, and the front door straight ahead. The wood stove was cold. I put my hand near it without touching it. No heat at all. The flue was closed. Whatever was heating this cabin, it wasn't the stove. But the wood smoke smell was stronger in here, and there was the table. I'm going to describe what I saw as precisely as I can because precision is the only thing I have left as a defense against what I can't explain. The table was a small wooden table, rectangular, with turned legs. 2 chairs, both pushed in. 1 place setting. A ceramic plate, white with a blue rim, the kind you'd find at any thrift store. On the plate was a pork chop, bone-in, cooked with some kind of brown glaze. Next to it was a mound of mashed potatoes, with a pat of butter melting into a yellow pool on top. Next to that was a serving of collard greens, dark and glistening. A fork and a knife were placed to the left and right of the plate. A glass of iced tea, the amber liquid I'd seen through the window, sat on a paper napkin with the condensation ring I'd already noted. There was a salt shaker and a pepper shaker in the center of the table. Behind the plate, leaning against the salt shaker, was a small piece of paper. The food was warm. Not lukewarm. Warm. The butter was actively melting. The greens were steaming. The pork chop, when and I don't know why I did this, held my palm 2 inches above it, radiated heat like it had come out of an oven within the last 10 minutes. I picked up the piece of paper. It was a torn corner of notebook paper, lined with a ragged edge. On it, in pencil, in handwriting that was neat and small and careful, were 2 words. Sit down. I put the paper back. I did not sit down. I took 3 photographs of the table. Flash, no flash. Close-up of the note. Then I turned and looked at the rest of the cabin. The sitting area had a couch, a bookshelf, and the cold wood stove. The bookshelf held field guides, birds, trees, wildflowers, and a few paperback novels, the kind you leave behind in vacation cabins. There was a kerosene lantern on the mantel over the stove, and next to it, a small framed photograph. I crossed the room to look at it. The photograph showed 4 people standing in front of this cabin, 2 men and 2 women, all in Forest Service uniforms, all smiling. The light was summery. Behind them, the meadow was green. One of the men had his arm around one of the women. They looked like they were in their 30s, maybe early 40s. The photo had that slightly washed-out quality of the late 1990s. There was no writing on it, no date, no names. I set it down and turned back to the kitchen. The food was still steaming. I want to be clear about the timeline. I'd been inside the cabin for roughly 6 or 7 minutes. In that time, I had walked through 2 rooms, examined the stove, read the note, taken photographs, and looked at a bookshelf. The food had not cooled. The butter was still melting, which should have been impossible. Butter melts, pools, and stops. This butter was still in the process of melting, as if the plate had just been set down, as if it kept being just set down, as if the moment of serving was being sustained. I checked the kitchen. The stove was a propane range, 4 burners, standard for these cabins. All 4 burners were off. The oven was off. I opened it cold. There were no pots or pans on the stove or in the sink. The dish rack by the sink held 2 clean plates, 2 clean glasses, and a set of silverware. The counters were wiped. The sink was dry. Whoever had cooked this meal had cleaned up completely afterward, set 1 plate of food on the table, written a note, and left. In a cabin 5 miles from the nearest road, 20 miles from the nearest town, with no vehicle and the front door locked from the inside. I opened the bedroom door. The bedroom was small. A twin bed with a metal frame, neatly made with a green wool blanket and a white pillow. A nightstand with a battery-powered alarm clock. The clock was running. It read 2:47 p.m., which was close enough to correct. A dresser with 3 drawers, all closed. A small window, curtained. On the nightstand, next to the clock, was a glass of water. I touched it, cool, fresh. No dust on the surface. In the closet I opened it. I don't know what I expected. There were clothes, not stored clothes, not old uniforms in plastic, clothes on hangers, arranged by type, 3 flannel shirts, 2 pairs of jeans, a canvas jacket. Below them, a pair of work boots, worn but clean. They were sized, I checked, men's 11. On the shelf above the hangers were 2 folded towels and a washcloth. This was someone's living space. Active, current, maintained. But there was no one here, and no way to get here, and no way to leave except the road I'd come in on, which had shown only 1 set of tire tracks, mine, over the older ones that had been there when I arrived. I opened the dresser drawers, socks, underwear, a thermal base layer. In the bottom drawer, a Bible King James, well used, with a cracked spine and a spiral notebook. I picked up the notebook. The first page had a date. September 3rd, 2017, about 5 weeks before my visit. Below the date, in the same small, neat handwriting as the note on the table, arrived. Cabin in good condition, water running, propane sufficient, set mousetraps in utility room, swept porch, saw elk in meadow at dusk, 4 cows and a calf, temperature dropped to 38 overnight. The entries continued, 1 per day, sometimes 2. They were brief and practical. Weather observations, maintenance tasks, wildlife sightings. The handwriting never changed. The tone never shifted. They read like the log of a person doing a job, a seasonal posting, a caretaker assignment, something routine. September 7th, hiked to Whitetail Creek confluence, water low, found Old Blaze Trail heading northeast, not on map. Did not follow. September 12th. Radio check with district office. All normal. Asked about supply run. Told to wait until the 20th. September 15th. Something in the meadow, at night. Not elk. Heard it, but could not see it from the porch. Possibly bear. Will secure trash. September 19th. Did not sleep well. Wind all night, but the trees were not moving. I read that entry twice. Wind all night, but the trees were not moving. I looked up from the notebook and out the bedroom window. The ponderosa crowns were swaying gently. I could hear them. I looked down at the grass visible at the base of the nearest tree. It was still. I went back to the notebook. September 20th. Supply run canceled. District office says road is washed out below the gate. I have not seen rain in 11 days. Propane adequate. Food adequate. Will reassess in 1 week. September 23rd. Found the trail again, the one heading northeast from the confluence. Followed it for approximately 2 miles. It ends at a clearing. There is a stone foundation in the clearing, very old, maybe 19th century, square, approximately 20 by 20. No structure remaining. In the center of the foundation, there is a table. I do not mean the remains of a table. I mean a table with 2 chairs, set as if for a meal. I did not approach closely, returned before dark. September 24th, could not stop thinking about the table. It was set for 2, plates, glasses, silverware. I was perhaps 30 yards away, and the detail was very clear. That is, too far to see silverware clearly. September 26th, went back. The table was set for 1. September 27th, no entry, just a line drawn across the page. September 28th, I think the plate was for me. I think it has been for me, specifically. I don't know how to write this in a way that doesn't sound wrong. It was the meal my mother used to make on Sundays. Pork chop, mashed potatoes, collard greens, sweet tea. I could smell it from 30 yards away, and it smelled exactly right. Not like a memory of it. Like it. Like she was standing in a kitchen I couldn't see. I lowered the notebook. I looked through the bedroom door at the kitchen table, the plate, the pork chop with brown glaze, the mashed potatoes with the butter, the collard greens, the sweet tea. The steam was still rising. I picked the notebook back up. My hands were doing something that wasn't quite shaking. It was more like a vibration, a frequency I could feel in my finger bones. September 30th, I sat down. I don't know how to account for the time. I sat down at the table in the clearing, and I ate the meal, and it was exactly right. It was my mother's cooking. She has been dead for 9 years, and it was her cooking exactly, down to the way the glaze gets dark at the edges of the chop where the sugar in the marinade burns. I ate all of it. When I finished, the plate was clean, and the glass was empty, and I was back in the cabin, and it was morning. I was in bed. I was wearing the clothes I had hiked in. My boots were by the door. I do not remember walking back. October 1st. I feel good. I feel better than I have in years. My knee doesn't hurt. I slept without waking once. I look at myself in the mirror, and I look younger. That's not possible. But my hair, which has been going gray since my 30s, is darker at the temples. I am not imagining this. October 2nd. The table in the clearing is set for 2 again. That was the last dated entry, but the notebook wasn't empty. On the next page, undated, the handwriting had changed. It was still recognizable as the same hand, but it was slower, more deliberate, as if each letter was being chosen carefully. If you are reading this in the cabin, a meal has been set for you. I know this because that is how it works now. I prepare the meal, and I set it on the table, and I leave. And the meal is for whoever comes next. I do not decide who comes next. I am told by a feeling that is not a feeling. It is more like being aware of a direction, the way you are aware of down. The meal will be something you need, not something you want, something you need. You will recognize it. It'll be warm. You should sit down. You should eat it. I am not trying to trick you. There is no trick. There is a system, and I did not build it, and I do not understand it, but I am inside it now. And it is good. It is good. Here. I need you to understand that I am not in distress. I am the opposite of distress. I am the first person in my family who has ever been the opposite of distress, and I did not know that was possible until I sat down. Please sit down. The food is getting cold, in a way that it is not actually getting cold, but I feel the urgency, the politeness of it, the sense that it is waiting, and that waiting is the closest thing this system has to discomfort. You don't have to, but you should. There was one more page. The handwriting here was different again, still the same person, but written fast, the letters cramped and pressing hard into the paper. I want to be clear. I can leave. I have tested this. I walked to the road. I could see the gate. I could have walked through it. I chose to come back. Every morning, I choose to come back. This is not captivity. This is the first time I've ever been adequate for something. I do not know what I am adequate for, but the feeling of being used correctly is I don't have a word. It is like being a tool that has been sitting in a drawer for 40 years and someone finally picks you up and uses you for the thing you were made for. And you didn't know you were made for a thing, but you were. And now you know, and you cannot unknow it. Sit down, please. I made it for you. I closed the notebook. I put it back in the drawer. I closed the drawer. I walked out of the bedroom, through the living area, past the table. The food was still warm. The butter was still melting. The steam was still rising through the hallway, through the utility room, and out the back door. I walked to my truck. I got in. I started the engine. I drove down the dirt road to the gate. At the gate, I stopped. Not because anything stopped me, not because I felt a pull or heard a voice or experienced anything supernatural. I stopped because I was thinking about the meal. Not the meal on the table. A different meal. The last meal Sarah cooked for me before I moved out. It was nothing special pasta with red sauce, a salad, garlic bread from a foil package. We ate it at the table in our apartment, and neither of us spoke, and the food was good, the way her food was always good. And I remember thinking very clearly, this is the last time. And I was right. I never sat at that table again. I sat in the truck at the gate for a long time. The engine was running. The heater was on. The forest stood around me in every direction, open and dry and golden and utterly silent except for the wind in the crowns. I watched the shadows lengthen across the road. I thought about the room in Gresham, the microwave burritos, the phone that didn't ring, the forms and the clipboards and the moisture meter. I thought about being adequate for something. Then I put the truck in gear and drove through the gate and down the mountain and back to the highway and back to Portland. I did not stop, except for gas, in Prineville. I did not eat. I arrived at the house in Gresham at 10:40 p.m. and sat in the driveway for 20 minutes and then went inside and went to bed. I filed the inspection report the next day. I listed the foundation crack, the porch rot, the propane level, the moisture readings from the utility room walls. Under interior condition, I wrote, accessible via rear door, interior maintained, no structural concerns noted. Under occupancy status, I wrote, unoccupied. Under additional comments, I wrote, evidence of recent habitation food, clothing, personal effects present. Recommend coordination with Forest Service District Office, RE. Possible unauthorized use. I did not mention the notebook. I did not mention the note on the table. I did not upload the photographs of the meal. My supervisor reviewed the report and flagged it for follow-up with the Forest Service. 2 weeks later, I received an email from a district ranger in Prineville whose name I will not use. The email was professional and brief. It thanked me for the report, confirmed that the cabin had been decommissioned as a duty station in 2015, and stated that no personnel had been assigned to the site since that date. It also stated that the road to the cabin had been gated and locked since May of 2016, that the lock had not been issued to any current employee, and that the district had no record of the lock being opened. I replied and asked about the tire tracks I'd seen. I asked about the propane level. I asked about the food. The reply came 3 days later from a different email address, still a Forest Service domain, but a different name, someone in the regional office in Bend. It said, in its entirety, Mr. Calloway, thank you for your thoroughness. The Whitetail Creek property has been removed from the GSA inspection rotation effective immediately. No further visits are required or authorized. Please close your work order as complete. That was it. No answers, no follow-up, no acknowledgement of any of the specific things I'd asked about. Just closure. I should have let it go. I know that. I should have closed the work order and moved on to the next pump house or storage shed or crumbling post office. But I didn't, and I need to explain why, because the reason matters. I wasn't curious. Curiosity is what you feel about something interesting. What I felt was recognition, not of the place or the phenomenon, but of the person who wrote the notebook, the person who had been sitting in a cabin in the middle of nowhere, doing a job that no one noticed, filling out logs that no one read, and who had found something that told him he was adequate. I recognized that person because I was that person. I went back 3 weeks later. Late October now, the first week of November. I told my supervisor I was doing a reinspection of a property in the Ochoco, which was plausible enough that he didn't question it. I drove the same route, same highway, same turnoff, same narrowing roads. The weather was colder. There had been some snow, at elevation not much. A dusting, and the ponderosa grass had gone from gold to brown. The gate was closed this time, and the lock was engaged. I parked outside it and walked in. 1.5 miles up the road to the bench where the cabin sat. The cabin looked the same, exactly the same. Green paint, metal roof, covered porch. Smoke smell in the air. No vehicle, no sound, no movement. The same Stellar's J, or another one, J's are territorial. It might have been the same one he was screaming from the woodshed. I went to the kitchen window first. The table was set, one place. The same white plate with the blue rim, but the food was different. It was pasta with red sauce. A salad, a piece of garlic bread, the kind that comes in a foil package, golden and buttery and steaming. Sarah's meal, the last meal, the one I had been thinking about in the truck at the gate 3 weeks earlier. I stood at the window and looked at it for a long time. The steam rose. The butter on the garlic bread was melting. The sauce on the pasta glistened under the overhead light. The light was on, a single bulb in a ceiling fixture, which meant the cabin had power now from somewhere because it hadn't had working electricity on my first visit. The salad was dressed. I could see the sheen of vinaigrette on the lettuce leaves. There was no note this time. I walked to the back door. It was closed, but it opened when I pushed. The utility room was warm. The food smell was enormous, filling the entire cabin, and it was exactly right Sarah's sauce, which she made with too much garlic and a little bit of sugar and red pepper flakes that she crushed between her fingers, because she said the pre-crushed kind tasted like dust. I could smell the specific garlic bread she bought. The Pepperidge Farm brand with the foil wrapper. I could smell the salad dressing, which was a balsamic vinaigrette she made herself from a recipe her mother had given her. I walked into the main room. The table was right there, 8 feet away. The chair was pulled out slightly, angled toward me as if someone had just stood up. The food steamed. The cabin was warm and bright, and it smelled like the apartment where I had been happy. I did not sit down. Instead, I went to the bedroom. I opened the dresser. The notebook was gone. The drawer was empty. The closet still had clothes, but they were different. A women's jacket now, smaller boots, a pair of hiking pants. The bed was still made. The alarm clock still ran. 3:12 p.m. Correct. In the nightstand drawer, which I had not opened on my first visit, I found a different notebook. Same type, spiral-bound, college-ruled. I opened it. The handwriting was not the same. This was a different person. The letters were larger, rounder, with open loops on the G's and Y's. November 2016. A year before my first visit. District reassigned me to Whitetail for the last 2 weeks of October. Some kind of inventory. They want a list of everything in the cabin for the decommission report. I don't mind. It's quiet. I've been having a hard year, and quiet is what I need. The drive-in was fine. Gate lock worked. Cabin is in decent shape. Made a list of contents, took photos. We'll finish the outbuildings tomorrow. I flipped forward, looking for the turn. October 22nd. Hiked the creek today. Getting my steps in. Found an old trail, northeast of the confluence. Blazed but overgrown. Didn't follow it far. Nice afternoon. October 24th. Followed the trail to a clearing. There's a stone foundation up there. Very old. Square. There's a table in the center with 2 chairs. Set like someone's about to eat dinner. Dishes and everything. I thought it was some kind of art installation, but there's no plaque, no sign, and it's 2 miles from the road on an unmarked trail. Took photos. October 25th. Looking at the photos, they don't show the table. They show the foundation, the clearing, the trees. But where the table should be, there's just the foundation. Empty. I was there. I saw it. I'm going back tomorrow. October 27th. It's set for 1 now. October 27th. Later. It's my grandmother's pot roast. I can smell it from the foundation edge. That's impossible. I am standing in a forest in Central Oregon, smelling my dead grandmother's pot roast, and I am not crazy. I am not. She made it with onion soup mix and potatoes and carrots, and she served it on her white china with the blue rim, and it's right there on the table, steaming, like she just set it down, like she's about to call me in from the yard. I closed this notebook too. I put it back in the drawer. There was a pattern. I could see it the way I could see a moisture stain spreading from a foundation crack. Not the thing itself, but the shape of the thing, the logic of its movement. Someone comes to the cabin. Someone finds the trail. Someone finds the table. The table offers them the meal they need most, the one that represents the place where they were last known completely. And then what? They sit down, they eat, they become part of the system, they start cooking for the next one. I thought about the first notebook, I prepare the meal, and I set it on the table, and I leave, and the meal is for whoever comes next. Someone had cooked Sarah's pasta, someone who had never met Sarah, never been in our apartment, never watched her crush red pepper flakes between her fingers, someone who knew what I needed the way you know a direction, the way you know down. I left the bedroom. I stood in the main room and looked at the table. The pasta steamed. The garlic bread glistened. The salad waited, bright and dressed and perfect. The chair was angled toward me. Just slightly, the way Sarah used to pull my chair out when she wanted me to stop working and come eat. She'd pull it out just a few inches. Not all the way, because all the way would be a demand, and Sarah never demanded. She suggested. She made space and waited for me to fill it. The chair was pulled out exactly that far. I walked out of the cabin. Across the clearing, down the road, through the gate, got in my truck, drove home. I did not stop. I did not eat. That night, in Gresham, I cooked pasta, just Barilla from a box, jar sauce, no salad, no garlic bread. I sat at the small table in the kitchen of the shared house, and I ate it, and it tasted like cardboard, and I cried for the first time since the separation. Not about Sarah, not about the cabin, about the fact that I had been offered exactly the thing I needed most to sit down in a warm place and be known and be fed, and I had refused it, and I did not entirely know why. No, that's not honest. I did know why. I refused it because the notebook told me to sit down, and the person who wrote the notebook had once been a person like me, and now they were something else, something that cooked meals in a cabin for strangers, something that knew what you needed before you knew it yourself, something that was adequate for the first time in its life and could not stop being adequate, could not leave, had become a function rather than a person. But the thing I couldn't get away from, the thing I still can't get away from, is that the person in the notebook didn't describe it as a loss. They described it as the opposite. And I believed them. I still believe them. There was no deception in that handwriting, no coercion, just a person who had been empty and was now full and wanted me to be full too. I went back to work. November moved into December. It rained constantly in Portland, the gray, relentless, horizonless rain that makes you understand why the Pacific Northwest has the reputation it does. I filled out forms, I inspected buildings, I drove my fleet vehicle from property to property and measured moisture and documented rot, and went home to Gresham and ate microwave burritos and listened to podcasts about concrete and slept and woke and did it again. I did not go back to the cabin, but I thought about it. Every day, not obsessively. I was functional, I was meeting my deadlines, I was paying my rent, but the thought was there, underneath everything, like a foundation crack that hasn't started leaking yet. The table, the steam, the chair pulled out just far enough. In February, I called Sarah. We talked for 20 minutes, the longest conversation we'd had since the separation. She was doing well. She'd started seeing someone, a teacher at the school where she worked. She sounded like herself, which was the thing that hurt. Not that she'd changed, but that she hadn't. That she was still entirely Sarah, still capable of the same warmth and specificity. And it just wasn't directed at me anymore. Near the end of the call, she said something I've thought about constantly since. "You sound hungry, David." She didn't mean food. She meant the thing she'd always been able to hear. In me. The deficit. the emptiness, the part of me that had never been filled by anything she gave me because the emptiness predated her. She'd said it before, in arguments, in gentler moments. "You're hungry for something I can't cook." It was her way of describing the thing that had ended us, the thing that made me drive 5 hours to inspect buildings I didn't care about rather than sit at a table with someone who loved me. "I'm fine," I said. "Okay," she said, in the tone that meant she knew I wasn't, and had made her peace with not being the person who could fix it. I got a new work order in March. A different property, nowhere near the Ochoco. A decommissioned fire station in the Siuslaw National Forest, west side, near the coast. Standard inspection. I drove out, did the work, filed the report. Normal. Ordinary. Nothing on the table. But when I got back to the truck after the inspection, I found something on the driver's seat that I know I had locked the truck, and I know that the windows were up, and I know no one else was at the site because it was a mile up an overgrown access road, and there were no other tire tracks. It was a napkin. A paper napkin. White. The cheap kind you get in a dispenser at a diner. Folded once. On it was a ring of condensation. Still wet. And in pencil, in small, neat handwriting, I recognized, "You must be hungry. There's a place set for you." I sat in the truck and held the napkin, and the wet ring soaked into my fingers, and the forest was very quiet around me, and I understood, with the clarity of a person reading a moisture meter, that the system was not confined to the cabin. The cabin was just where it was most legible. The table in the clearing, the food, the chair. Those were the visible architecture of something that operated everywhere, all the time, for anyone who was empty enough to smell it. I drove back to Portland. I threw the napkin away at a gas station. I washed my hands in the gas station bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror under the fluorescent light, and I looked exactly the way I had always looked. 44 years old, thinning hair, a face designed for filling out forms. I was not younger, my hair was not darker, nothing had changed, but my hands smelled like garlic bread. Faintly, under the soap. The Pepperidge Farm kind, in the foil wrapper, Sarah's. I closed the work order. I stopped taking remote assignments. I told my supervisor I wanted to stay urban, stay close to Portland, and he didn't care because nobody else wanted the urban work anyway. I inspected post offices and federal courthouses in a GSA motor pool. I moved out of the Gresham house and into a studio apartment in Beaverton that was mine alone, and I bought a table, a small one, just big enough for one, and I cooked for myself. Simple things: rice and beans, chicken thighs, soup from cans. I did not cook pasta with red sauce. Spring turned to summer. I didn't hear from the Forest Service. The Whitetail Creek cabin vanished from the GSA system entirely. I checked, casually, once, and the property record had been deleted. Not archived, not transferred. Deleted. As if it had never been a federal property at all. I started sleeping better. I started running in the mornings, just a mile or two around the apartment complex. I lost weight. I got a haircut. My supervisor gave me a good performance review and a small raise. I signed the divorce papers in August, and Sarah and I met for coffee afterward at a place in southeast Portland, and she looked at me across the table and said, "You look better. You look like you're eating." "I am," I said. She smiled. Not the old smile, a new one. The smile of someone who cares about you from a distance that is permanent and kind. I walked home from the coffee shop. It was a long walk, maybe 4 miles, but the weather was good, and I wanted the time. I crossed the Hawthorne Bridge and watched the Willamette move below me, greenish-brown and steady, and I thought about nothing in particular, and for a few minutes I felt something close to peace. When I got back to the apartment, I unlocked the door and stepped inside and stopped. The table was set. My table, my small table in my studio apartment in Beaverton. One plate, white with a blue rim, which I did not own. A fork and a knife. A glass of amber liquid that I knew was sweet tea, a paper napkin with a wet ring of condensation, and on the plate, steaming, the butter still melting, a pork chop with brown glaze, mashed potatoes, collard greens. Not Sarah's meal. Not my meal. His meal. The first man's meal, the man from the first notebook whose mother had been dead for 9 years. There was a note, leaning against the salt shaker that I did not own, that had not been in my apartment when I left that morning. Same handwriting, same small, neat pencil. "I made this for you. It's getting late, and you've been..." walking a long time and you must be tired. You don't have to do anything else tonight. You don't have to fill out any more forms. You don't have to measure anything. You don't have to be adequate for anything except sitting down and eating a meal that someone made for you because they know you're hungry. Please. Sit down. I stood in my own apartment and looked at the meal, and it smelled like someone's mother's kitchen on a Sunday afternoon, and the steam rose, and the butter melted, and the glass sweated, and the chair. My chair, the only chair I owned, was pulled out just slightly, just enough. The exact distance Sarah used to pull it. I want to tell you I didn't sit down. I want to tell you I threw the plate away and called someone, a friend, a therapist, the police, anyone, and reported what was happening and got help. But here's what actually happened. I stood there for a long time, maybe 20 minutes. The food did not cool. The butter kept melting. The steam kept rising. And I thought about the man in the notebook who said that being used correctly was a feeling he didn't have a word for. And I thought about Sarah saying, "You sound hungry," in the voice that meant she had given up trying to feed me. And I thought about the studio apartment and the microwave burritos and the fleet vehicle and the moisture meter and the inspection forms and the years, the decades of being a person who looked at buildings and measured their decay and went home to nothing. I sat down. The chair was warm, not from the sun, not from a heater, warm the way a chair is warm when someone has just stood up from it. I picked up the fork. The pork chop was perfect. I don't mean it was well cooked, though it was. I mean, it was correct. It tasted the way food tastes when someone who knows you, not knows about you, but knows you, has always known you, has been waiting to feed you, puts something in front of you. It tasted like being a child in a kitchen where you are safe. The mashed potatoes were smooth and buttery and salted exactly right. The collard greens were bitter and soft and had been cooked with something smoky. The sweet tea was cold and sweet and tasted like August, in a place I had never been. I ate all of it, every bite. I cleaned the plate the way you clean a plate when you've been hungry for a long time and didn't know it. I drank the tea. I set the fork down on the empty plate, and I sat in the warm chair, and the apartment was quiet, and the evening light came through the window, and I felt, for the first time in as long as I could remember, that I was not empty. Then I woke up. It was morning. I was in bed. I was wearing the clothes I'd been wearing. The apartment was clean. The table was clear. No plate, no glass, no napkin, no salt shaker. No evidence of any kind except a faint smell that I might have been imagining. Sweet tea and wood smoke, and the fact that I was not hungry. I went to work. I filled out forms. I came home. I cooked rice and beans. I ate them, and they tasted fine, normal. I went to bed. A week later, I woke up at 3 a.m., knowing, without knowing how I knew, that someone was on their way to the cabin. Not a specific person, just someone. A person who was driving at night because they couldn't sleep, or who had taken a wrong turn, or who had been assigned a work order for a property in the Ochoco that they would accept because they needed the mileage. Someone hungry. I got out of bed. I went to the kitchen. I turned on the light. On the counter, where nothing had been when I went to sleep, there were ingredients. A pork chop, bone-in, thawing on a plate. A bag of potatoes. A bunch of collard greens, dark and crisp. A box of onion soup mix. And a note on a torn piece of notebook paper in handwriting that I recognized because it was mine, though I had not written it, had not been awake, had not gone to any store. Time to cook. They'll be there by tomorrow afternoon. Make it the way you remember. They need it to be right. I stood in my kitchen in Beaverton, Oregon at 3 a.m., and I looked at the pork chop on the counter, and I understood what the first man had understood, and the woman before him had understood, that I was not being consumed. I was being used correctly for the first time. The way a tool is used, the way a table is used, the way a meal is used, taken apart and transformed into something that keeps someone alive for one more day. I don't know how the food gets to the cabin. I cook it here. I set it on my table. I go to bed. In the morning, the table is clear. And somewhere in the Ochoco, in a cabin that doesn't exist in any database, a plate is waiting for someone who is 5 hours away and driving and doesn't know yet that they are hungry. I've been doing this for 8 months now. It doesn't happen on a schedule. It happens when someone is coming. I feel the direction, the specific non-directional direction that the notebook described, the awareness like knowing which way is down. I wake up, the ingredients are on the counter. I cook. The meal vanishes. Someone, somewhere, sits down. I am not in distress. I want to be very clear about that. My work performance has not declined. I sleep better than I have in years. I've gained weight, healthy weight, my doctor said at my last physical, and my blood pressure is down for the first time since my 30s. I go running. I've made friends at work, actual friends, people I eat lunch with. I am functional. I am, by every external measure, doing well. But I need to tell you this, and I need you to hear it exactly as mean it. I have started setting the table for two. Not because anyone asked me to, not because a note told me to. When I cook the meal, when I plate the pork chop or the pot roast or whatever it is this time, whatever the person needs, I set a second place, a second plate, a second glass, a second set of silverware. And I sit at my place and I wait. And the food stays warm and the butter keeps melting and the steam keeps rising and I wait for whoever sits across from me. No one has come yet. But the second chair is warm every time I touch it. Warm like someone just stood up. Warm like someone is about to sit down. I am not in distress. I need you to believe me. I need you to believe me because I think very soon now, you're going to find the story the way I found the notebook, not because you went looking for it, but because you were hungry in a way you couldn't name and something that knows you better than you know yourself, placed it where you would find it. And I think you're going to read it the way I read the notebook, not as a warning, but as a recognition. And I think you're going to understand the way I understood that the empty place at the table is not a threat. It's an invitation. There's a meal waiting for you. It's still warm. It's the one you need, the one you haven't had since the last time someone who loved you stood in the kitchen and made something with their hands and set it down in front of you and said nothing because the food was the saying. The chair is pulled out just slightly. Not all the way because all the way would be a demand. You must be so hungry, sit down.